Hello there. Welcome to the Light Story Club. Settle in and find a comfy spot to relax. Before we get to the story, I would love to know your favorite myths and monsters. Comment where in the world you are and let's begin the story. I was born from a thunderclap. Not the soft kind that rolls through spring skies and nudges daisies awake, but the kind that splits mountaintops and commands silence from the gods. I remember no mother's warmth, no quiet lullabies, only the blinding ache of emergence and the solid crack of being. One moment there was nothing, and the next, I stood on Olympus, fully formed, with a spear in my hand and wisdom curling like silver fog behind my eyes. Father, Zeus, the Thunderer, stood before me, his eyes wide in wonder, relief, and pride. I had come from him, they said, sprung from his very mind, after he swallowed my mother Metis, goddess of deep thought and cleverness. I suppose that's where I got it from, the patience to watch, the drive to understand, the longing to know. No infant tears for me, only questions, only curiosity. What is that? I asked, pointing to the strange glow beyond the horizon. The mortal world, he said, voice like shifting glacier. You'll come to know it in time. And I would. Not yet. Not fully. But I would. My first days were spent wandering Olympus, watching the great gods like a child studying stars. I watched Hera stitch storms into her robes with thread made of peacock shimmer. I watched Poseidon forge new currents in a bowl of seawater, swirling them with his fingertip. I watched Artemis string moonlight across her bow, and Apollo hum a new song into being with golden breath. But I did not play. Not like the others. Instead, I built. I took pebbles and arranged them into temples, drawing little humans from clay and making them bow and sing. I practiced speeches before an audience of wind. I created strategy games with lines in the dust and moved stones like armies. And always, the others would come and glance, some amused, some wary. She's strange, Dionysus said once, watching me talk to an owl I'd sculpted from stone. Too serious for a child. But I didn't mind. Serious was simply how the world made sense to me. There was joy in solving puzzles, peace in perfect design. One day, I wandered too close to the edge of Olympus, where the clouds thin and the world of mortals begins. I looked down and saw a city, Athens, though it had no name then. Just huts and fires, men and women arguing over boundaries, drawing lines in dirt, eyes wide with fear and wonder and hunger for more. Something stirred in me, a pull, a thrum. I didn't understand it yet, but I would. That city was calling me, though neither of us knew it yet. That night, I dreamt of olive trees growing from stone and voices singing of reason and light. When I awoke, there was a sprout growing from the marble floor where I had laid my head. Olympus was a palace of wonders, of marble and mist, laughter and fury, and secrets carried in the folds of godly robes. Though I was young by immortal standards, I grew not in height but in thought, each passing moment layering insight like stone upon stone. Yet even I, goddess born of mind and storm, could not resist the tug of play, not quite. The other young gods gathered often in the amphitheater of clouds, a great arena ringed with skyfire, where we played at war and wit. Not the wars mortals would bleed for, but contests of strength, puzzles, riddles, and dreams. They called them the games, and all were invited, Apollo with his golden crown of harmony, Artemis who never missed her mark, Hermes with his quicksilver grin, and ours, red-eyed and eager to clash. I joined only once at first. It was a game of wits, to devise a solution for a kingdom trapped in eternal darkness. Apollo painted his answer with sunfire, a chariot of light to circle the earth. Hermes tricked the darkness with mirrors. But I, young as I was, knelt and whispered a name into the air. Hope. I carved a statue from marble, holding a lantern. Let them find the light in themselves, I said. Let each one carry a piece of the sun inside. They called it poetic. But I saw something flicker in Zeus's eyes, something proud and haunted at once. From then on, I was part of the games. A different kind of player, perhaps, but no less devoted. I studied as not to fight like him, but to understand his need for glory. I listened to Apollo's songs not just for beauty, but to hear the patterns behind them. I traced the constellations Artemis left in her wake and wrote their meanings in secret books I kept under the feathers of my owl, NYX. Ah yes, NYX. She came to me during a night when the wind howled strange and cold, not like the breezes of Olympus but like the breath of something older, deeper. I was alone near the cliffs, tracing battle formations in the dirt, when a shape swooped from the clouds and landed before me. A small owl, dusky gray with eyes like polished amber. She did not speak, not in words. But I understood her all the same. You are wisdom, I whispered. And solitude. She blinked, once. From then on, she was mine, or perhaps I was hers. She watched everything, never missing a detail. She was my mirror, my muse, and my secret keeper. We traveled Olympus together. The games grew more intricate. One day, Poseidon challenged me to create something mightier than his ocean storms. I planted a seed. At first, the others laughed. It was small, fragile, just a twist of green. But I waited. I tended. And soon it grew into an olive tree, its branches strong, its fruit nourishing, its trunk firm against any wind. Wisdom, I said, outlasts the tempest. The sword rusts. The tree grows. Even Poseidon nodded. That was the first time I heard the whispers. Quiet, faint like ripples across a still pond. They came not from Olympus, but from below. The mortals were speaking my name, not yet in prayer, not yet in temples, but in awe. She watches, they said, the goddess with the owl eyes. I was beginning to understand. The games were not just play. They were preparation. For me. For something more. One dusk, as NYX and I walked beneath the vault of stars, I turned to her and asked, "Do you think they will ever truly understand what I am?" She blinked, then looked skyward. I followed her gaze and saw, far below, a flicker of torchlight by the sea. Athens was stirring again. And so was I. By the time I felt the tremor in Olympus, the city below had begun to speak my name with reverence, not wonder. Not 1,000 voices yet, but enough to shift the clouds underfoot. Mortals, so fragile and brief, had begun to build. Not just huts, but temples. Pillars. Thought. And where there is thought, I am never far behind. It was then that Zeus summoned us all to the council hall, his throne ringed with storms and echo. I stood between Apollo's gold-lit laughter and Heros' sharpened grace, NYX perched silent on my shoulder. Poseidon arrived last, trailing salt and lightning. "There is a city," Zeus said. "One that shall become great. Athens, they call it, though it bears no patron god." The murmurs began instantly. "They honor no one." Hera frowned. "They honor many," Zeus said. "But they seek one who will guide them above the rest. It is time for a contest. Two shall present gifts. The mortals shall choose." Apollo stepped forward, but Zeus raised a hand. "Not you, nor Hermes, nor Hestia. This city must be forged by strength and wisdom, by force and restraint." He turned, eyes like distant stars. "Athena, Poseidon, you will go." There was a quiet stillness after that. No thunder, no cry, just the rustle of my robe and the sea shifting around Poseidon's feet. We did not speak to each other as we descended from Olympus. But I knew this was not just about a city. It was about legacy. He arrived first, great Poseidon, brother of storms and king of waves. His trident struck the earth with a roar, splitting the stone. From the wound surged water, clear at first, but quickly foaming, wild and briny. "Behold," he said to the gathering mortals, "the gift of power. A wellspring that connects you to every ocean. A force to ride, to command." The people gasped. The ground trembled. Then I stepped forward. I carried no weapon, only a single seed in my hand. I knelt and pressed it gently into the dirt, the soil still steaming from Poseidon's blow. I whispered a word in the language of roots and sky, and there, before them, grew an olive tree, slow and graceful, its branches stretching wide, leaves shimmering green and silver. "This," I said, "is peace. It brings nourishment, oil, wood, shade. It asks nothing but patience. And yet, it gives more than war ever could." The people were quiet. Then one stepped forward, an elder woman with worn hands and steady eyes. "We will choose her," she said. "The goddess of wisdom. The one who thinks before she strikes." Poseidon's jaw tightened, his sea blue eyes darkening. He turned without a word, the foam around his feet retreating like a sullen tide. But I remained. And Athens was mine, not to own, but to protect. They built a temple in my honor, small at first. Just a circle of stone and prayers whispered into olive smoke. I visited at night, unseen, listening to them speak of harvest and harmony, of justice and learning. They did not beg me for conquest. They asked for guidance, for cleverness, for patience. I gave it gladly. In time, the city would rise in marble glory. But even then, in its infancy, I saw what it could be. A home not just of power, but of philosophy, art, and purpose. That night, I returned to Olympus, walking silently beneath the stars. Zeus was waiting. "You've done well," he said, watching me with eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "But it will not be easy. Wisdom is not always welcome in a world that craves might." "I know," I said, "but it will outlast it." He nodded, and in his silence, I heard approval. In my chamber, NYX fluttered to her perch and closed her eyes. I sat by the olive sprout growing through my floor and whispered, "We are not finished." The wind shifted, carrying my promise into the sleeping city below. Though I had no memory of my mother, she whispered in my dreams. Not as voice, not as shape, but as knowing. A presence, like standing beneath a great tree you never planted, yet knowing its roots run through your bones. They said she was Metis, first wife of Zeus, goddess of cleverness, strategy, and deep counsel. Swallowed whole when my father feared a child too powerful would be born of her. And so I was. But she had not vanished. One evening, with Olympus sleeping and starlight heavy on the wind, I followed the pull of something ancient and soft, softer than any cloud, stronger than any stone. It led me beyond the usual bounds of the gods, past the silver pools where Apollo sang his quiet songs, past the forge heat of Hephaestus's volcanic dreams. I reached a cliffside where no god tread often, where the grass grew wild and untouched. There, hidden beneath a veil of shadow and olive light, I found it. A garden. Not the lush kind Dionysus favored, nor the sculpted kind Hera tended like a mirror. This one was wild, brilliant, half forgotten. Vines curled around books left open in the grass. Fruit trees grew in spirals, not rows. Strange herbs with names I didn't yet know hummed softly, pulsing with secret knowledge. The wind smelled of ink and lemon and ancient parchment. At the center was a well. Not deep, not dry. It shimmered faintly, and I knew, without needing to be told, that it was hers. Metis. The garden was all that remained of her form, yet it was enough. Enough to teach. Enough to speak. I came there often. Each time I sat by the well, questions would rise from the water like steam. Not in words, but feelings, riddles in the heart. Sometimes I answered aloud. Sometimes I simply understood. It was here I learned how to think sideways, how to see many angles from one truth, how to find silence in a storm, how to win without wounding. NYX perched on a vine above me, sometimes blinking in time with the whispering leaves. There was a moment, I remember it now, when I touched the water and saw a flash, a great library, not yet built. Stone columns shaped like scrolls. Children in linen robes reading beneath olive branches. A future. My city's future. When I blinked, the image was gone. But not from me. I stayed until the moon slipped low and the garden folded itself back into shadows. When I returned to Olympus, I carried with me not new weapons, not spells, but ideas. I began to sketch plans, blueprints, scripts in every language I knew. Temples, schools, courts. Not grand yet, but strong. The others noticed. Still playing with parchment. Hermes teased one day, flipping one of my scrolls with his quick fingers. "No," I said, gently taking it back. "I'm playing with time." He laughed, but not unkindly. The Garden of Metis remained my secret, my quiet refuge. I never spoke of it to Zeus, though I wondered if he knew. Perhaps he feared it still. Perhaps he honored it in silence. What I knew was this: wisdom was not only born of battle and victory. It grew, unseen, in gardens. It listened more than it shouted. It returned again and again, even when swallowed, even when forgotten. And as I stood before the small olive tree in my chamber that night, watching its roots curl through the stone, I whispered into the air, "Thank you, Mother." The wind curled around me, warm with lemon and parchment. She had heard. Some gods wield thunder. Others, flame or wave or wine. I came to know the loom. Not the clumsy frames mortals used to make tapestries for their walls, nor the high golden looms of Olympus woven by the Graces and the Fates. This loom was different. It existed not in one place, but in many threads running from city to city, temple to home, mind to mind. A loom of decisions, of legacies. I discovered it when I was watching mortals again. They had begun to weave, literally, artifacts in my honor. Cloth banners stitched with owls and olive leaves. Simple at first, but thoughtful. Deliberate. I was intrigued. Creation was its own kind of war, I realized. A gentler one, but no less vital. I asked Hephaestus for a loom of my own. "You," he said, looking up from a glowing anvil. "Athena, mistress of war and wisdom, wanting to sew? To build," I corrected. "Not all threads are silk. Some are ideas." He grunted, but he gave it to me, half metal, half light, a gift of fire and patience. And I began. I wove at dusk, when Olympus was quiet and golden. I wove in silence. I wove history and dreams. And the loom taught me. One evening, a mortal name drifted up from the world below, Athena. A weaver. A brilliant one. Too brilliant. "She says she is better than the gods," Artemis told me, half amused, half concerned. "Better than you." At first, I let it be. The gods are always whispered about, challenged, envied, loved, feared. But the whispers grew louder, wilder. Athenia's tapestries drew crowds. Her fingers moved like thought itself. She wove the affairs of gods into her art, truths we often hid. Unflattering truths. "She mocks us," Hera muttered. "Mocks you." So I descended. I wore a mortal face, a grey cloak with feathers stitched in the lining, and approached her loom. Athena was young, confident, eyes like storm-polished stones. She worked as if the world bent around her. Careful, I told her gently. The gods do not take kindly to pride. She laughed. If they are proud, why shouldn't I be? If they create beauty, so can I. Her words stung, not because they were false, but because they weren't. She had talent. Fierce, unflinching talent. But she lacked balance. She saw craft without consequence. I challenge you, I said at last, stepping forward and shedding my disguise. The air shimmered. Her loom went still. The crowd gasped. We shall weave. Side by side. Let your work speak. She agreed. And so we did. Her tapestry was bold stories of God's mistakes, their selfishness, their wrath. Art, yes. But sharp. Dangerous. Almost cruel. Mine showed the birth of olive and peace. The rise of just cities. Wisdom guiding the hands of queens and craftsmen alike. When we were finished, even she knew. Her hands trembled. It's not your skill I punish, I told her. It's your spite. A gift is nothing if it blinds the heart. She wept. But I did not strike her down. I did not scorch her to ash or silence. Instead, I transformed her into a spider, agile, hidden, forever weaving. Let the world learn from you, I said, even in your quiet form. Many see only the curse in that, but I see mercy. Arashan still weaves, still teaches. Her silk hangs in corners, unseen, quietly perfect. Back at Olympus, I sat at my loom once more. This time, I wove not only thoughts and visions, but stories. Stories with endings I could guide. Some sad, some hopeful. All true, because the loom is not just mine. It belongs to all who seek to understand what connects us. And even gods must sometimes learn that the sharpest wisdom wears a humble thread. In Olympus, mirrors do not simply reflect, they remember. They show not only what is, but what was, and sometimes, when the gods aren't looking too closely, what might be. My chamber held no grand pool of prophecy like Apollo's. No enchantments that shimmered in trickster riddles like Hermes. But I had my owls. They came one by one, not all at once. NYX was first, of course, my closest, my shadowed second self. But others came in silence, their wings dark as dusk, their eyes lit like stars behind clouds. I never called them, but they came. They perched along the eaves of my temple, on the marble railings and ancient olive trees, motionless for hours, watching both sky and soul. I came to realize they were not just companions. They were mirrors. Not of my face, but of my being. Each one reflected something within me: calm, judgment, sorrow, inquiry, strategy. I named them not with words, but with thoughts: echo, quill, feather, hollow, torch. And one day, I found a true mirror, crafted not by gods, but left long ago in the garden of Metis, half buried beneath fallen branches of starlight and leaves that whispered old ideas. It was made of obsidian, smooth and still, set in an owl-shaped frame of tarnished bronze. No enchantment sparked on its surface, no thunder rippled through it. But when I peered in, I saw not my face, but myself. The version of me that had not yet arrived. Older, wiser, standing among books and spears and the shattered shields of war turned to garden trellises. I looked both weary and luminous, like a flame that had burned clean through a long night. I touched the surface, and for a heartbeat, she touched back. Then the image scattered, the mirror went cold, and my owls stirred all at once. What did you see? I whispered to them, though they would not answer with words. NYX blinked slowly, but one owl. A younger one, new to my eaves, opened its beak and dropped a single white feather at my feet. A sign, or a reminder. That night, I dreamt of the future again, a city with libraries taller than temples, with voices raised not in fear, but in debate and song. I saw women teaching, warriors choosing peace, kings bowing to the counsel of wisdom instead of the cruelty of impulse. And I saw myself walking barefoot through a grove where statues of forgotten gods leaned gently toward one another, no longer demanding, just listening. When I awoke, the mirror was gone, vanished, as if it had never been. Or perhaps I had never truly found it, only been allowed a glimpse. But the owls remained. And from that day forward, they no longer only followed me. They flew farther, across Olympus, down to mortal lands, and even beyond the sea. They returned with eyes full of visions I had not yet dreamed. A child reading by lamplight, a queen scribbling battle plans in secret, a craftsman pausing at sunset, wondering if there might be more than gold to shape. I wrote each vision down in my secret scrolls, because I knew now, my wisdom did not end with me. It did not belong to Olympus alone. It would carry outward, feather by feather, thought by thought, from mirror to mirror, until one day, even a mortal girl staring into her basin might see something deeper, might hear the rustle of wings overhead, might know that she, too, is being watched, not judged, not commanded, but seen. And maybe, just maybe, she would become a goddess in her own way. The first time I was given a spear, it felt too loud in my hand. Not because of its weight, Olympian metal is light as breath to a god, but because of what it meant. Spears are not only for battle, they are for decisions that split the world in two. Right or wrong, strike or stay. As a child of strategy, I understood the spear. But understanding is not the same as agreement. Hephaestus made mine. Polished bronze, long and gleaming, with a tip that caught moonlight like a blade of fate. For you, he said, placing it in my hand, to match your shield. They will know you by this. Yes, they would. But I would not let it define me. I trained, of course. It would be foolish not to. My form was already shaped by thought. So learning the rhythm of strikes, the geometry of defense, came easily. A spear is a line, a logic, a thread drawn straight through confusion. It teaches you how close the enemy must come before the world sharpens. But as I moved through drills and duels, I noticed something. The moments before the strike held the most power. When you raise a spear, the world holds its breath. Hearts race. Eyes lock. Time pauses, waiting for a decision. And so I began to explore what could happen if that decision was not made. If the spear did not fall. If it simply stayed. I remember the first time I stopped a battle not with force, but with presence. Two kings, one mortal, one demigod, were locked in a quarrel that had turned to blood. Their armies clashed along a riverbank that once fed a village's harvest. I stepped between them. I said no words. I held my spear upright, and did not move. They screamed, threatened, demanded. But I did not move. And something in them faltered. A recognition. A memory, perhaps, of the first olive tree. Of a city spared. Of wisdom chosen over wrath. Their swords lowered. Their armies drifted back like smoke caught in wind. I walked away, and the water of the river flowed again. From then on, whispers began, "She does not always strike." And I did not correct them. There were still times when I fought. There are always times when darkness rises too fast, when negotiation fails, when cruelty claws too deep. But each time I lifted the spear, I asked myself, is this the silence before truth? Or the sound of forgetting what we are meant to become? Zeus watched me with curious eyes during those years. I think he struggled to understand. His power was thunder, after all. Flash, impact, consequence. Mine was something slower. Stillness. Restraint. The option not taken. I forged a second version of my spear, one made of silverlight and wind, and I gave it to a mortal girl who had stopped a war by writing songs. She never raised it, only carried it, and that alone changed the shape of her city's future. And so the silence of the spear spread. A moment, a thought, a symbol. Even now, mortals hang it above hearths. They carve it into stone. They tell their children, she watches, but she waits. That is enough. Because the loudest power in the world is often the one that chooses not to speak. It began with a single name whispered by the wind, Athens. At first, it seemed like chance. A humble village nestled between sea and hill, its people too proud to kneel, too curious to stop asking questions. Others thought little of it. But I saw it for what it was, a place becoming ready. Not for conquest. For idea. I visited first in disguise. A shepherd girl, barefoot and sun-warmed, walking the dusty paths between olive groves and shrines built from clay. I listened to their stories. I helped their scribes sharpen reed pens. I knelt beside their well and listened to the water speak. And I knew. This was the city I would love as fiercely as any warrior loves her blade. Not because it was mighty, but because it could be wise. But I was not the only one drawn to it. Poseidon came with his trident, offering crashing waves and swift horses, power and trade and all the roaring wealth of the sea. Let them worship me, he said, his voice shaking the ground. I will make this city feared. I came softly, planting a single olive branch in the dry soil. Let them choose, I said. Not out of fear, but from understanding. The gods gathered to watch. And the people, those flame-hearted mortals, did something rare. They paused. They thought. They saw Poseidon's flood and heard the promise of empire. But they also saw my tree begin to grow, its roots strong, its fruit nourishing, its wood promising shelter, tools, learning. And they chose me. Not for glory, for possibility. That night, I returned not in disguise, but in light. I stood beneath the stars and felt the city settle around me like a cloak. The people sang my name, not in fear, not in trembling awe, but in honor. They built my temple from marble, veined like thought. They carved owls and leaves into every pillar. But more than that, they began to become me. They built schools where children could argue with their teachers. They wrote plays that questioned kings. They sculpted justice in courtyards and etched laws with reason, not revenge. And when war came, as it always does, they fought not for expansion, but for balance. Yes, they made mistakes. Great ones. They banished poets. They misunderstood freedom. They were mortal. But they remembered me. Not just in statues, but in spirit. In silence before action. In dialogue before decree. In the careful weight of the spear that does not fall. I did not rule them. I belonged to them. They were my mirror, my mortar, my song. I watched as one young thinker named Socrates began to ask questions that turned stone to light. I watched as a girl, uncelebrated, wrote equations in the dust that later lit the path for ships. I watched as lovers, enemies, strangers all gathered in the agora, not to fight, but to think together. And above it all, my olive tree grew. Taller than the Parthenon. Quiet as breath. Its leaves shimmered silver under the moon, rustling with every new idea born below. To this day, they call me Athena Parthenos, Athena the maiden, untouched, unbroken, and ever watchful. But I do not dwell in temples. I dwell in thought. In every corner of that city, my city. That dares to question instead of conquer, that listens as fiercely as it speaks. And whenever someone, anywhere in the world, chooses wisdom over might, patience over pride, I am there. There are libraries above the sea, tall and sunlit, with scrolls that whisper when touched. And then, there is mine. The hidden one. The one beneath the waves. Few know of it, even among the gods. I built it quietly, word by word, thought by thought, during the long ages when mortals still feared thunder more than silence. While Poseidon sang to sailors and Zeus hurled light, I dove deep into memory. Beneath the Aegean, where coral clings to forgotten ruins and sea serpents coil like questions never asked, I found a cavern. Or rather, it found me. Its walls pulsed with a strange rhythm, like the heartbeat of time itself. There was no light, but I brought my own. Not fire, not magic. Wisdom, and the desire to keep it. That is what the library was for. Not power, not prophecy, preservation. Inside, there were no shelves, only orbs of crystal thought, suspended in currents. Each held a story, a mother teaching her son to count stones, a girl drawing stars into sand and discovering geometry without knowing the word, a village saving a river by choosing to listen instead of dam. These were not heroic tales, not in the Olympian sense. They were human, and that made them divine. I added to it slowly. Every time a mortal discovered something quiet and luminous, something that pushed the world forward without demanding glory, I sealed it into one of the spheres. I wove protections around them, puzzles instead of chains. The library was never meant to be hidden out of fear. It was hidden because some truths bloom only in stillness. Once, Hermes followed me. He tried to be quiet. He wasn't. I let him peek. He touched a sphere that glowed warm and soft. A memory of an old woman teaching others how to write in secret, beneath tyrant rule. He said nothing after. He simply nodded and left. Even he knew, not all treasures are meant to be stolen. I made paths to the library for those worthy, not by birth, or crown, or sword, but by question. A sailor with salt in her hair and poetry in her bones once found her way there. So did a blind philosopher who heard the language of the sea like a voice from his youth. Each left changed. Each told no one. But the world noticed, in small ways. A law made gentler. A city made wiser. A war not begun. Sometimes, I returned simply to float between the knowledge. I would drift through the archives like an idea between thoughts, feeling the stories press softly against me like waves remembering the shore. Poseidon never touched it. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't try. He rules the sea, but I know its depths. That library, that quiet heart beneath water and war, reminded me why I had chosen thought as my companion. Because long after fire dims, and cities fall, and even Olympus forgets its own shape, thought remains. Patient, waiting. And somewhere, even now, a child might dive into the waves and find something glowing softly, calling her home. Gods do not weep. Or so they say. Not for pain, we do not bruise. Not for love, we do not need. Not for loss, we are eternal. But I remember the day I cried. The wind knew. The stone remembered. It was not because of war. I have seen war. I have ended war. It was not because of defeat. I do not measure myself in victories. It was because of a child. A mortal girl. Her name is lost now, even to me. Time is a current we cannot always swim against. But I remember her hands, ink-stained and trembling. Her voice, soft, sure, and full of questions. She was a thinker, a weaver of ideas, too young for courts, too bold for silence. She believed, naively, sweetly, that truth alone could change the world. And for a time, it did. Her village grew peaceful beneath her counsel. She spoke at gatherings, taught others to write, solved quarrels with parables instead of punishment. I watched her rise not with crowns, but with clarity. And that was her danger. For the world, even now, is not always ready for what is gentle and true. One night, a new chieftain came to power, afraid of losing control to a girl who held no weapon. He burned her books. He outlawed her gatherings. He called her dangerous. And she, who had never lifted a sword, was hunted. I tried to intervene, but not with thunder. That was never my way. I sent omens, dreams, warnings in birdsong. I whispered to elders. I stirred guilt in the hearts of those who followed cruel orders. Some resisted, but not enough. She was taken beneath a temple meant for me. Not my grand temple on the Acropolis, but a simple stone one, where someone had once carved my name beside an olive tree. And there, in the shadow of a sanctuary built for wisdom, she was silenced. Not for what she did, for what she thought. The moment it happened, I felt it in my chest like a crack in marble. And I cried. Not just a tear, a storm. Rain that soaked the heights of Olympus. Thunder that split even the clouds that had never known grief. My owls scattered. The wind wailed. The very olives wept oil into the soil. Zeus asked me what was wrong. I said only, a fire has gone out. One I did not light, but that lit the world nonetheless. I left Olympus for a time after that. I wandered the mortal lands as mist and shadow, sitting beside quiet thinkers and frightened scribes, holding their courage like a candle between two hands. I began planting more olive trees than ever. In courtyards, in schools, in secret groves. Each one a marker not just of peace, but of memory. And beneath the tree where the girl had been taken, I left something. A seed. Not of fruit. Of knowing. Years later, another girl found it. A distant relative, perhaps. Or maybe just a soul born with the same fire. She began to write, in secret. Her words spread. Her questions spread. And a village began to listen again. Not all was lost. It never truly is. Even now, if you walk among the olive trees when the wind is still, you may hear something in the leaves. A whisper. A name not spoken in centuries, but remembered in spirit. And if you feel a drop of water fall, not rain, not dew, know that I am near. Because even gods, sometimes, must cry. Not all of me was born of war. Though the myths will say I sprang fully formed from Zeus's head, steel-eyed and armed, I remember differently. I remember her. Metis. My mother. The goddess of deep wisdom, older than plans, older even than fear. She was the thought behind the thunder. The murmur before memory. She did not shout. She did not rule. She understood. Before I was ever a figure of marble, I was an idea cradled in her arms. And though Zeus swallowed her to keep prophecy at bay, fearing the child she would bear, I still carry her voice within me. It echoes, soft as breath in a closed room. Whenever I close my eyes, I can feel her presence, like warm roots beneath the cold stone of Olympus. In my earliest days, before I had a form, before the forge, before the shield, I dreamed of a garden. It was hers, and it was mine. It lay beyond the folds of known Olympus, in a place not even the fates charted. A space of growing things. No temples, no thrones, no declarations, only trees that glowed with silver fruit, streams that hummed questions instead of answers, and vines that wrote their stories in curling tendrils. Here, I wandered. Not as a goddess, but as a child. Unseen. Untested. I touched petals that held languages. I sat on stones that remembered dreams. I listened to the earth murmur in the voice of my mother. All strength begins in stillness, child. Power is the leaf, but thought is the root. I asked her if I would be mighty. She asked me what mighty meant. In the garden, no armor could follow me. My shield grew soft with moss. My spear flowered with ivy. I learned to see without seeking, to ask without needing answers, to walk through silence as though it were song. The gods would not understand that place. Zeus tried once to enter, in a dream. He found only fog, because the garden does not open to command, only to return. It is still there, I think, somewhere between waking and word, nestled in the folds of my mind. When I grow tired of bronze and politics, I go there, not in body, but in memory. Sometimes I see her, Metis, standing among the saplings. She does not speak. She only watches. But in her eyes I find the courage to pause. To remember that wisdom is not always about what we know, but how we choose to know it. That garden raised me, just as surely as Olympus did. And while I walk among kings and warriors now, while poets call me fierce and sculptors give me wings, I know that the truest part of me is still there, barefoot in the soft soil of thought, listening for the bloom of a quiet truth. And when I lead others, mortals, gods, or ghosts, I try to lead them not to temples, but to gardens. There are many kinds of kinship on Olympus. Blood, yes. Oaths, often. Rivalry, always. But some bonds bloom not from birth or promise, but from understanding. Hephaestus and I were not raised together. Our origins are as different as flame and wind. He was cast from Olympus as a babe, his fall echoing down the spine of the world. I rose from Zeus's brow with a spear in my hand and a war cry in my throat. We should have had little to say to each other, but we did. Hephaestus was not beautiful like Apollo, or loud like ours, or elegant like Hermes. He was bent from the fall, soot-stained, silent when the halls of Olympus roared with games and gossip. The others mocked him except for Hera, who both loved and feared him. I did neither. Instead, I saw him. I saw the way he touched metal as if it had breath, the way he coaxed meaning from ore, shaping ideas into form with every strike of his hammer. Where others saw deformity, I saw discipline. Where others saw ugliness, I saw fire made clever. He saw me too, not as a statue in gold or a name sung in battle, but as a mind sharp enough to forge meaning from thought. So he gave me a gift. Not armor, not weapons. A tool belt. It was not for battle. It was for making. Small pliers, a tiny chisel, a loop of silk thread that could stitch words into the seams of cloth. A spindle that spun not wool, but light, the kind found only in dreams remembered too late. I laughed when he handed it to me. This is not very goddess-like. He smiled. It's exactly that. From then on, we worked together in silence. I designed temples that did not lean on power but on beauty, and he forged the joints that made them last centuries. He built machines to help the lame walk, the mute speak, the broken bend but not break. I showed him how to weave logic into the gears, so they would choose kindness over conquest. We argued, of course. I told him not every problem could be fixed with fire. He told me not every idea could live in thought alone. We were both right. Sometimes, in the quiet between battles and festivals, we would sit on the edge of Olympus together, watching stars sink into the sea. No words, just sparks drifting from his fingers, and thoughts spinning slowly in mine. One night, he said, they always speak of you as a warrior, or a judge, or a queen. I said nothing. Then he said, but to me, you're a maker, just like me. And that was the first time he ever called me sister. I wear that word more proudly than any title. Not goddess. Not strategist. Not protector. Sister. It means creation without envy. Loyalty without condition. A bond stronger than myth. Even now, when mortals light their hearths or strike iron to shape a future, they carry a trace of us. The maker and the mind. The hammer and the hand that draws the blueprints. Together, we forged more than tools. We forged a way forward. There are thrones of gold, cold and hollow. There are thrones of fire, burning with hunger. And then, there is mine, a seat carved not by gods, but by decision. The owl feather throne. It wasn't forged in Olympus. It wasn't gifted or stolen or built to tower over others. It was constructed deep within the mortal realm, in a quiet city that knew my name not only as a prayer, but as a challenge. It began as a simple stone bench in the shade of an olive tree. There, judges sat not above, but among the people. Poets debated farmers. Soldiers listened to children. Women, those often barred from temples, sat and spoke, their words echoing like bells across the courtyard. Wisdom was not hoarded. It moved. Over time, that bench grew. Not in size, but in meaning. It was carved with feathers, not from real owls, but imagined ones, each one representing a moment of clarity, a choice made not for power, but for peace. The people called it the owl feather throne. And they waited. Not for a king. For me. I resisted, at first. I do not like being worshipped. I prefer being remembered. But the throne called not to my pride, but to my purpose. It was not meant for command. It was meant for judgment, yes, but the kind guided by understanding, not law. So I came. And I Saturday. The sky did not shatter. The ground did not tremble. I was not flanked by thunder or heralded by fire. I was simply present. They brought me questions. Not battles. Not sacrifices. Not shrines. Questions. A mother asked if it was right to teach her daughter to read when the city forbade it. A builder asked if he could craft homes taller than trees without casting them into shadow. A boy asked if it was cowardice to forgive the soldier who had burned his home. I answered none of them. I reflected them. I turned their words back toward them, reshaped and softened, as a stream softens the edges of stone. I did not tell them what to do. I helped them remember what they already knew. That day, I saw something remarkable. Wisdom spreads fastest not from edicts, but from example. And so the throne became more than stone and feathers. It became a trial. Not for me, for anyone who sat upon it. For when you took that seat, you agreed to listen deeper than you spoke. To carry silence like armor. To accept that sometimes, the wisest path is not the easiest. Or the fastest. Or even the most fair. It is the path that sees the whole. The throne still exists, though few recognize it now. It sits in a forgotten courtyard, worn smooth by time, the owl carvings faint as whispers. But if someone brave enough sits upon it today, they might still feel the weight of those questions. The warmth of sunlight through olive leaves. The presence of a goddess who believes not in knowing everything, but in knowing how to begin. There are nights when even the stars grow quiet. Not from storm or shadow, but from forgetting. It happened once, long ago, on a night so still the sky seemed to hold its breath. I was walking through the high hills of Attica, alone in thought, the world beneath wrapped in sleep. The stars above twinkled as they always did, familiar, faithful Orion on his endless march. The Pleiades clustered like whispered secrets, my own owl-shaped constellation perched in its corner of sky. But then, one by one, their lights began to dim. Not extinguished. Confused. They flickered, not like dying flames, but like questions. As if they had woken from a long dream and could not remember who they were. I felt it in my chest before I saw it with my eyes. A tug like a string snapped in the loom of the cosmos. Something was wrong. I climbed the tallest olive tree I could find, higher than the cypress line, and sat on the topmost branch, my eyes locked on the trembling sky. Then I did what I always do in the face of unknowing. I listened. And in that stillness, I heard them. The stars. They were murmuring, not in sound, but in memory. They could no longer recall the names mortals had given them, no longer remembered the myths they carried. They wept, in their way, light shivering against the black. Without their stories, they were lost. I knew that feeling. Even we gods are nothing without the meaning shaped around us. So I did something no goddess had done before. I told the stars new stories. I sat in that olive tree and spun tale after tale. Not of gods and war, but of people. Of a woman who navigated oceans by instinct. Of a shepherd who mapped the heavens with dots in dirt. Of a child who sang lullabies to the moon because her parents had none to give her. Each time I told a story, a star pulsed brighter. One by one, they began to remember. Not their old names, not their ancient roles, but their purpose. To guide, to remind, to shine, not because they had to, but because someone, somewhere, might look up in the dark and need them. By dawn, the stars were steady again. The sky wore its constellations proudly, like tattoos of old joy. But something had changed. One small star, barely visible to mortal eyes, lingered above my shoulder as I climbed down from the tree. It followed me home. It did not speak. It simply glowed, soft and loyal, as if to say, "You remembered us. Now we will remember you." That star still follows me, you know. You've seen it, though you didn't know its name. It hovers just behind the crescent moon, faint but constant. When you're lost, it flickers twice. When you're afraid, it dims just enough to be seen, so you know you're not alone. I never gave it a name. Some things are too sacred for that. Some things simply are. There is a place on the farthest edge of thought where memory has no anchor, and time folds inward like a scroll before it's written. That's where the mirror of the first thought lies. Few know of it, even among the gods. Fewer still have stood before it. Not because it is hidden, but because it does not wish to be found. It waits for those who have reached the far edge of certainty and dared to step past it. I was very young when I first found it. Or perhaps not young at all, because time within the mirror is not measured in years, but in selves. And the self I carried that day was weary, worn from war councils and endless questions, from voices praising my wisdom but never hearing my quiet. I had walked from Olympus for days in silence, shedding armor not just from my shoulders, but from my thoughts. The forest around me grew stranger with each step. Trees bent inward like listeners. The ground glimmered with pale moss that hummed beneath my feet. There was no path, only instinct. And then I saw it. A pool, still as glass, ringed with stone teeth and soft petals. It didn't reflect the world behind me. It reflected the world inside me. I leaned closer, and I saw her. Not the goddess, not the warrior, not the shield maiden, but a girl, alone, barefoot, carrying a flame in her hands and a question in her eyes. What if I am not wise enough? It stopped me, because I'd never dared ask that aloud, not to the gods, not to mortals, not even to myself. The mirror had. I stepped back, breath caught like a bird in my throat. But I did not run. I couldn't. Something in that reflection, raw, unarmored, true, felt more sacred than any temple I'd entered. The mirror did not judge. It did not mock. It offered. And so I sat a day. I watched the girl in the water, and she watched me. We blinked in unison. We did not speak. But slowly, her question changed. What if I am? From that day on, the mirror lived inside me. Not the surface, no. That still waits in the forest, unknown and undisturbed. But the truth of it. The knowing that beneath all the wisdom, all the logic, all the graceful arguments and clever plans, there is a child still holding a flame. And asking if it's enough to light the way. I visit the mirror often, in dreams. When the voices grow too loud. When the world asks too much. When I begin to mistake silence for ignorance or stillness for weakness. The mirror shows me not answers, but beginnings. And that is the gift it gives. Not knowing, but the courage to keep seeking. So if ever you find yourself lost in a forest of thought, and the path curls inward, and the wind grows soft with your own name, look for the mirror. Not to see yourself, but to meet yourself. The you that existed before anyone told you what you should be. That first thought. That brave question. That flickering light still burning. I have always loved mazes. Not because they confuse, but because they reveal. You see, a straight path shows you where to go. A labyrinth shows you who you are. I did not build the great labyrinth beneath Crete. That was Daedalus, clever, tragic Daedalus, whose mind outpaced even his hope. But I walked it once, long before Theseus ever stepped into its mouth. I was young then, curious, still learning that sometimes the only way out is in. The entrance was simple, stone arch, sunlit ground, the scent of laurel. But once inside, the light dimmed, and the world narrowed into twists, choices, echoes. I thought I could map it. I was wrong. Each corridor bent not with stone, but with memory. I turned a corner and found a younger version of myself arguing with Poseidon over Athens. Another corner, and I was standing in front of the first city I ever helped design, its walls still untested, its people looking up at me with questions I didn't yet know how to answer. I walked for hours, or days, or years. Time melts in mazes, until at last, I reached the center. There, in the very heart of the labyrinth, was no minotaur, no beast, no enemy, only a thread, not made of wool or silk. It shimmered with something older in tension. It pulsed gently, waiting, and I knew. This was not a thread to guide me out. It was the thread I had left behind on the way in, woven with every choice, every doubt, every question I had carried into the maze. It had been with me the whole time, unseen, unbroken. I took it in my hands, and I followed it backward, retracing the questions I had asked, the fears I had met, the truths I had shaped along the way. The labyrinth didn't shrink. I grew. By the time I reached the exit, I wasn't the same goddess who had entered. I was not lost. I was woven. That's the secret I wish Theseus had known. It was never the slaying of the beast that mattered. It was the thread. The courage to leave a part of yourself behind when entering the unknown. The wisdom to follow it back, not to escape, but to understand. I've carried that thread ever since. Sometimes it tangles. Sometimes it trails behind me like a silver ribbon, catching on the wind. But I trust it. Because the path of wisdom is not a line. It is a labyrinth. And every time I lose my way, I smile. Because that means I'm about to remember who I truly am. Every god has a symbol. Zeus with his lightning, Poseidon with his trident, Ars with his blood-slick blade, and me, the owl, yes, the olive branch, of course, the spear, sharp and certain. But beneath all of those, older than any banner raised in my name, there is another emblem, the lioness beneath the laurel. Few remember her now, but she was once etched into the base of my earliest statues. Not as ornament, but as origin. Before the titles, before the temples, before the stories sharpened into marble, she was there. My first teacher in the art of quiet strength. I found her as a child, in the wild hills where no temples stood. I was chasing a storm, trying to catch the shape of thunder in my hands, something foolish and divine. But I stumbled instead upon a cave, cool with moss and shadow. And inside, she watched me. A lioness. Not golden or glorious. Her fur was ragged, her body thin from hunger. She did not growl. She did not flee. She simply watched. I should have feared her, but I sat instead. I don't know why, only that something in her eyes mirrored my own, a sharpness tempered by stillness, a readiness without aggression, a strength that needed no roar to prove itself. For hours, we shared that silence. And then, she rose, padded past me without sound, and disappeared into the brush. But not before brushing my shoulder with her flank, a touch that said, "You are not prey. You are kin." That night, I wove a wreath of laurel and placed it on the rock where she had lain. Not as tribute, as remembrance. And when I returned to Olympus, I asked Hephaestus to etch her form into the underside of my shield. Not to display, to carry. For the world would see the owl, the spear, the crown. But I would know, beneath all of that walked the lioness. Years later, when mortals came to ask for signs, when cities begged for emblems to raise above gates, I offered the olive tree. It grows in drought. It roots in stone. It gives fruit even when broken. But in the quiet, when I visited heroes in dreams, or whispered to a child standing brave in her defiance, I sent not the owl. I sent the lioness. Because wisdom is not always soft. Sometimes, it has teeth. Sometimes, it watches. And sometimes, it waits in silence, until the moment comes to rise. So if you ever find yourself alone in the woods of your own fear, chased by storms too large to name, look for the eyes that do not judge. Look for the silence that feels like strength. She is still there. The lioness beneath the laurel. Watching. And waiting to walk beside you. There are days, even for gods, when inspiration disappears. No thunder. No light. No tragedy to explain it. Just silence. And once, long ago, the muses, those 9 radiant sisters of thought and verse, fell completely silent. No epics. No melodies. No stories spun on riverbanks or sung through temple halls. They simply stopped. It happened in the early spring, when the snows had just melted from Mount Helicon and the rivers were swollen with new life. Poets gathered for their usual festivals, ready to offer songs and stories, but found their tongues sluggish. Their hands trembled over empty parchment. The lyres would not tune. The air was heavy with unspoken words. I felt it immediately. As if a chord inside my own mind had gone slack. The world was still moving. Yes, flowers bloomed, stars turned, but without the muse's breath, it all felt like a painting with no painter, a verse with no rhythm. So I went to them. I climbed the slopes of their sacred mountain, expecting music to swell with each step. Instead, I found them gathered beneath a tree, silent as stones. Calliope, the grand muse of epic. Clio, keeper of history. Euterpe, bringer of song. All of them sat with bowed heads and blank eyes. Their voices had not been stolen. They had forgotten why they sang at all. That's when I understood, even the divine need purpose. Even the endless grow tired. I did not speak to them with logic. I didn't craft an argument or recite the lineage of art. Instead, I knelt beside Terpsichore, the muse of dance, and began to tap my fingers against the earth. Slowly, softly, a rhythm. At first, nothing happened. But then her foot moved, just a twitch. I added a second beat, and a third. My hand became a drum, my body a metronome. No words, no rules. Only reminder that life itself is a rhythm. That joy begins in the bones, not the mind. Next, I stood. I didn't dance with grace. I wasn't trying to impress. I remembered the awkward twirls of girlhood, the joy of running barefoot through temple corridors, the way wind lifts hair like laughter. And slowly, the muses began to move. Talia let out a snort of a laugh. Melpomene wiped a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. Erato hummed a single note, quiet, questioning, hopeful. Then, one by one, their voices returned. Not like a choir, but like sparks catching in dry grass. Sudden, bright, alive. Calliope sang the first line of a new epic. Clio spun a tale she'd never known she remembered. Polyhymnia raised her hands to the sky, and light poured through her fingers. The mountain breathed again. And I sat down and let them sing. Because sometimes the wisest thing to do is step back and let others remember their own light. Since that day, whenever mortals suffer a silence they cannot explain, when artists feel empty, when words come jagged or not at all, I send not solutions. I send a rhythm, a tapping foot, a distant drum, a heartbeat steady and patient beneath the hush. Because inspiration is not a gift that visits only once. It is a returning. And when the muses forget to sing, they just need someone to remind them of the first note. It is said I am the goddess of cities, of walls and gates and marble streets, of wisdom made stone, of order drawn in straight lines and right angles. But the first city I ever loved fit inside the back of a tortoise. You might think that strange. Many things about childhood are. I was wandering again, this time through the southern hills where time grew in wild waves and the cicadas sang like tiny suns. I had no destination, just a head full of thoughts and sandals full of dust. That's when I saw her, a tortoise, slow and steady, crossing a dry stream bed. She was old, ancient, even by godly standards. Her shell was cracked but whole, the color of sun-baked clay, and painted across her back in faded pigments and carvings too fine for any mortal hand was a city. Minuscule houses, temples the size of a fingernail, roads no wider than a thread. All crafted with such care that even the tiny market square had a central fountain. I knelt, entranced, and as I did, I heard them. Not words, but the murmur of life. Laughter echoing between miniature homes, the clatter of dishes in a kitchen the size of a beetle, a lullaby rising from the tiniest cradle, a city alive, beneath my gaze. I dared not touch her. Instead, I followed. Day after day, she walked, never hurried, never still for long. Her path wound through ruins and orchards, across dry fields and sacred springs. And the city shifted with her. At night, the glow of fireflies would hover just above the shell, like stars around a moving sky. I dreamed beside her. I learned from her that a city is not its stone, but its heartbeat. Not its walls, but the stories inside them. After many days, she paused atop a hill and turned her head, just slightly, as if to acknowledge me. Then she continued on, disappearing into the tall grass, carrying her world with her. I never saw her again. But the image stayed. Later, when mortals asked me how to build a city, I thought not of marble, nor battlements, nor perfect symmetry. I thought of that tortoise. And I told them, build with patience. Let your homes travel with your hearts. Make room for silence, for story, for the small things. A city that cannot move with its people is not alive. Somewhere, even now, I think she still wanders. And if you ever hear a strange murmur in the breeze, soft as a market waking at dawn, you may have stood near her. So listen carefully. Cities are not born in thunder. They begin in care. And the oldest, wisest ones can fit in the palm of a dream. Would you like to continue with chapter 20? The day I forgot my name? There are moments in life, moments rare and strange, when everything you know about yourself slips like sand through your fingers. The day I forgot my name was one of those moments. It did not happen in the halls of Olympus, nor on the battlefield where courage and strategy intertwine. It happened on a quiet afternoon, beneath the soft shadow of olive trees, where the sun dappled the ground in gentle gold. I woke up feeling unanchored. I could see my hands, my shield, the spear resting nearby. I could hear birds singing, and the distant murmur of the city. But when I reached for the name that defined me, Athena, the sound was gone. Like a word whispered on the wind and lost before it reached your ears. For a moment, panic fluttered inside me like a trapped bird. Who am I, if not Athena? I wandered without thought, letting the breeze carry me through streets and gardens. Faces smiled, and I smiled back, but I did not know why. I met a child weaving a crown of flowers, and she looked at me with eyes wide and trusting. I wanted to tell her who I was, but the name did not come. So instead, I Saturday. And I listened. To the laughter of the market, to the rustling of leaves, to the quiet prayers whispered beneath breath. And slowly, the threads began to gather. A memory of wisdom shared. A memory of courage tested. A memory of stories told long before the name mattered. In that silence without identity, I found something unexpected. I was not just a name. I was a collection of moments. A tapestry woven from kindness and battle. From questions and answers. I was becoming. When the sun dipped low and the stars began to blink awake, the name returned not as a label, but as a song. Athena. Not just a name, a promise. To be more than one thing at once. To be both the shield and the hand that lifts it. To be both the silence and the voice. That day, I learned that forgetting is not loss. It is space. Space to grow. Space to remember what truly matters. And when I finally spoke my name aloud, it carried not just power, but freedom. For I was not defined by it. I was alive within it. In the loom of the cosmos, every thread matters. Some are bright and bold, shining like the stars themselves. Others are soft and subtle, barely seen until they catch the light just so. I learned this lesson early, watching the Moirai, the Fates. At their work. They do not rush. They do not falter. Clotho spins the thread of life, careful and deliberate, while Lachesis measures its length with quiet resolve. And Atropos waits, not with cruelty, but with inevitable grace, to cut the thread when the time has come. I once asked them why they wove as they did, why some threads tangled, why others frayed, why a single moment could ripple through so many lives. Clotho smiled, her fingers never pausing. Because, she said, the tapestry is not ours to see. Only the weaving. I watched their hands move, strands twisting and crossing in patterns too vast for any single eye to comprehend. And I realized wisdom is not about seeing the whole. It is about trusting the weave. Trusting that each choice, each thread, no matter how small, carries meaning. That even when the pattern seems chaotic, there is design. That even when the thread feels fragile, it holds. I carried this truth with me in battles, in council, in moments when mortals doubted their place in the world. Because fate is not a trap. It is a weaving. And we are all part of the loom. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom is to step back. To let go of the urge to control every strand. And to learn the patience of the fates, who know that every thread, every moment, every breath, makes the tapestry whole. There is a story I carry like a secret, one told only in dreams. It is the story of how the olive tree came to be, but not as mortals know it. This is how I remember it. I was young, still learning to balance the weight of wisdom and compassion. The lands below me were restless, war and hunger stirring in the hearts of men. They looked to the gods for signs, for gifts, for guidance. One night, I dreamed of a single olive seed, small, unassuming, nestled in the dark earth. I held it carefully, knowing this seed could grow to shelter cities, feed armies, and inspire peace. But as I looked closer, I saw something else. The seed was fragile, vulnerable to storms and neglect. It needed care, not power, to thrive. I dreamed of planting it beside a river, where waters would sing lullabies, and the sun would kiss its leaves gently. And I dreamed of a child, curious, brave, who sat beneath that tree, weaving stories from its branches, learning that strength is not only in the sword, but in patience and nurturing. When I awoke, I carried that dream with me. I gifted mortals the olive tree, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a lesson. Growth requires time. Peace requires tending. Wisdom is rooted in patience. And even the smallest seed, when cared for with love, can become a shelter for all. Since then, whenever I see an olive tree swaying in the breeze, I remember the dream. And I whisper a blessing for those who seek strength without haste. For in every leaf, there is a story. And in every story, a seed, waiting to grow. There is a part of wisdom few speak of, the strength found not in light, but in shadow. The gods are often seen in radiance, lightning, flame, or brilliance. But shadows hold their own kind of power. I learned this lesson one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with amber and violet. I walked alone through the olive groves, the long branches casting intricate patterns on the earth. A mortal boy followed quietly, curious but hesitant. He carried a simple wooden staff and eyes wide with wonder. He asked me, "Why do shadows feel cold? Why do they scare us?" I smiled and knelt beside him. "Shadows are not to be feared," I said softly. "They are the resting places of light. The spaces where things can hide, but also where things can be found." He looked puzzled. I continued, "Without shadows, the sun's rays would burn too fiercely. Without darkness, the stars could not shine. Sometimes, strength is quiet, like the shade beneath a tree, offering shelter." He nodded slowly, understanding blooming in his gaze. "Sometimes," I added, "wisdom is not in shining brightest, but in knowing when to step back, to wait, and to watch." That night, as the stars blinked awake in the velvet sky, I saw the boy leave, his steps lighter, no longer afraid of the dark. Because he had learned the quiet strength of shadows. And so have I. The owl has always been my silent companion, a creature of the night with eyes like lanterns, wisdom wrapped in feathers. I remember the first time I saw an owl soar through the moonlit sky. It was not with the rush of a falcon or the roar of an eagle, but with quiet, deliberate grace. Each beat of its wings was a soft whisper, a careful dance in darkness. I asked myself then, what makes this creature so wise, so revered? One night, I followed the owl into the deep woods, where shadows curled like smoke and the world was hushed. The owl flew low, weaving through branches and stars, leading me to a clearing bathed in silver light. There, the owl landed and turned its head, its eyes meeting mine with a knowing calm. In that gaze, I saw patience. The owl waits for the perfect moment, silent and steady, watching, learning. It moves only when the time is right, never rushed, never reckless. It reminds me that wisdom is not loud or sudden. It is the quiet flight through uncertainty, the careful listening before speaking, the steady presence amid chaos. From then on, whenever I felt the world spinning too fast, I would close my eyes and imagine the owl's flight, slow, sure, guided by a deep knowing. And with that, I found calm. For wisdom, like the owl, is a gift of silence, patience, and grace. Strength often wears a visible armor, a shining breastplate, a polished spear, a war cry that shakes the air. But some strength is invisible. I learned this truth on a battlefield not of sword and shield, but of quiet courage. A young soldier stood trembling beside me, his hands slick with sweat, his eyes wide with fear. He asked, "How do I protect those I love when I am so small? When I feel so weak?" I looked at him and saw not weakness, but a heart beating fiercely beneath fragile skin. I said, "There is a shield no enemy can pierce. It is not forged from bronze or iron." I took his trembling hand and placed it over his chest. "Here is your strongest shield, your courage, your hope, your will to stand even when you want to fall." He frowned, uncertain. "Sometimes," I said, "the greatest protection comes from within. It is the shield you cannot see, but that guards you always." The battle that day was fierce, but the soldier fought bravely, not because of sword or armor, but because he believed in that unseen shield. I watched him rise again and again, each time stronger. And I knew then that true strength is not always visible. It is the quiet force inside that holds us steady when the world shakes. As the sun sinks low behind the hills, and the sky spills its last colors into twilight, I stand at the edge of all I have known and all I am still becoming. The journey from girl to goddess has not been marked by sudden storms or grand battles alone, but by quiet moments like these. Moments when the world holds its breath, and I can hear the steady rhythm of my own heart. I have learned that wisdom is a river, flowing endlessly, sometimes swift and shining, sometimes slow and shadowed. Each twist and turn shaping the land around it, carving new paths where none seemed possible. I have seen the threads of fate, tangled and bright, and felt the patience of the earth beneath my feet. I have known fear and courage, silence and song. And in every step, I have carried a single truth: becoming is never finished. A name is not a cage. A shield is not only protection but a promise. The olive tree still grows, its roots deep in the soil of hope. The owl still flies, a quiet guardian in the night. And I, Athena, am more than I was yesterday, and less than I will be tomorrow. The light I carry is not a beacon fixed and bright. It is a flame, flickering in the wind, inviting others to gather, to share, to grow. So I step forward, not as a goddess who knows all, but as one who listens, learns, and dreams. The story is not mine alone. It is ours. And in the soft hush of night, beneath the watchful stars, I whisper a blessing to you who have listened. May your path be woven with courage and kindness. May your heart find its unseen shield. And may you always remember: the light of becoming never fades. It only grows. Thank you for listening to this light story. If you enjoyed this lovely tale, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Light Story Club will be here for when you want to listen to another chronicle to help you rest. Goodbye for now.